Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, for the graveyard shift, this is a great turnout. And we do promise a very engaging conversation on topic unusual, casinomics. And most of us have had similar, or we've had a conversation, but this one is going to be pushing the boundaries and having a different conversation about this very, very pertinent topic. And I'd like to start off by thanking my esteemed panel for joining me today. And I'd like to introduce us by asking this question. We've been to conferences, we've had this conversation around the Kasi economy or the township economy. But Busi, I'd like to start with you and say, why is it important to have this conversation at this particular conference in 2025?
Yeah, thanks, Lesego. I think the way I answer that question is to say, what is the role of small businesses beyond providing, the basic goods and services into their communities? And for me, it goes much broader. And the most important one is that these businesses provide significant employment opportunities in the areas in which they operate. And let me make it practical for you. Right? A friend of mine owns a car wash. That car wash employs 7 or 8 people. Right? Now, if we just say that one employee at the car wash provides for 2 people, one small business already covers 21 people. Right? So those 21 people make sure that they've got food on the table, and they don't have to worry about, getting their kids to school. So that's the one key thing. The second thing that is important in my mind is what I call social cohesion that is created by these businesses. That, those of you that grew up in a township, you would know very well that, the local soccer team did not have any sponsor, but it was an old man around the corner that provided the sponsorship to the team. And what did it do? My days of growing up in a township, it kept us away from all the troubles that are around, right? We would be able to focus and participate in these things. And I'll close off my answer, Lesego, by saying that it's very tempting for many of us to say that, this is not my problem, right? It's somebody else that must solve this. But ultimately, we pay for it, right? Some kid has figured out when they calculated the risk premiums for your insurance that if there's unemployment, there's a risk, right? And your premiums are much higher. So those of you that are providing services and solving problems in these economies, I think you need to be commended, because you're not just helping us build a great country, you're actually making sure that my insurance premium remains contained.
The commercials do matter.
Indeed.
And I'd like to then tap into Brian, where Busi touched on the role of the business in the community. As an entrepreneur in one of the townships in Gauteng at Ridgeville, your lived experience, why is this conversation important that we are having here today?
I think, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think for me, it's probably the first time that I'm in a conference that addresses these kind of issues, because in the community, it's almost like nobody's really listening or nobody really cares. Let's just throw in the products into the market and let's see what happens. So for a conference like this, it shows that at least now we can have conversations, not only conversations on a level where we don't quite understand, on a level where someone like myself is given an opportunity to perhaps give insight on a lived experience on these day-to-day challenges, obviously, that me, myself, and some of my other entrepreneurs throughout the country, obviously looking into my township, So yeah, I think it's very important, and I'm very happy that we're having this conference.
Thank you, Brian, for that. And Stasha, I then would come to you and say, it is a payments conference. If we're linking what Busi talked about, these very, very important institutions in the townships, the lived experiences of Brian, what is the role of payments, and what can payments do in order to uplift, support the township economy beyond what we are seeing today?
Yeah, thanks, Lesego. Well, I think that we've all heard the story multiple times that money makes the world go round. And I think it would be fair to say that at least over 80% of our economy is run in the township economy and with small businesses. And what's been very interesting, certainly in the retail space over the last 10 years, the conversation has changed considerably. Initially, there were one or two voices in the room that cared about B2B. But now you'll notice that almost every single organization, whether it's a fintech, a bank, a mobile operator, etc., is all talking about how can we support our B2B businesses. And I think what Busi said was very important to say they build economies and support families. 7 people being employed looks after 21. And if you start compounding that, all of us in this room and in the whole conference have a responsibility to support our B2B businesses. And one of the ways that we do that is with payments. So every engagement for a business or a consumer is either buying or selling something, whether it's a service or a product. And we have the responsibility of making sure that the network, the infrastructure, the support, and the services are there for these businesses to be able to operate.
Thank you. And then I'm going to touch on a topic that is topical, for lack of a better description. And we're talking about networks, we're talking about digital, we're talking about technology. But we have cash. And cash is stable, cash is trusted, cash is there. Busi, I'm going to come back to you and say, in having this conversation, especially in the township economy, how are we having a conversation on digital? And how does that relate to the cash debate that we've been having of old? And how do we have a different conversation as it relates to the township economy, digital, and cash?
Yeah, so earlier on today, somebody made a comment around adoption, right? To say that if you want me to move from product A to product B, this product B, at minimum, must be on par, right? Or give me even a better proposition than the old product, right? So to have this conversation, we have to unpack the value proposition of cash, right? And I'm not going to go through the entire list. I mean, even some of the examples that were given yesterday. But let's start with very simple things here, right? There's the question of immediacy, right? Now, we all know that if I exchange value with you, it's immediate, right? Now, let's look at the offerings that we have in the market today, right? There's aunties here by the Gautrain station. They sell very good food. And I commended them the other day that you are now using digital, right? And they were quite happy to say that, my business has increased, right? But one of the comments that was also made was that, listen, if I run out of anything here, they cook food, so if they run out of groceries, of oil or whatever, they need to go and buy from the mall. And they said that, but you know what? The money, I only get it the next day, right? This is digital, right? But immediacy is not there, right? And I'm talking about this in the context of the business owner. The immediacy is not there, right? And then the second thing that is worth looking into, right, is that people perceive cash to be free, right? And I'm deliberately and provocatively choosing, perceived, right? Because all of us sitting in this room here, right, we all know that we say, no, cash is not free, there's a cost to cash and all of that, right? But guess what? We are not the ones that are making the decision, right? What we think is actually immaterial, doesn't matter, right? It's that business owner that makes the call to say that, is this costing me money? I've sold a loaf of bread for 25 rands. I'm not sure how much a loaf of bread costs these days. But, is that close?
Yeah, he's able.
Wow!
He's healthy, clearly. It doesn't need
A bit
bread.
close. Sorry.
There's a conversation to be had with Busi about who does the groceries.
You know, anyway, let's move along. Right? Let's move along. Right? So, if you sold your loaf of bread for 25 rands, it matters to you whether you got 25 rands or you got 24 and 50 cents, something like that. Right? It matters for that business owner. Right? So, we still need to deal this matter here. It doesn't matter what we think. What matters is that client on the other side that says that, you know, is this costing me money, yes or no? Right? And the last thing that you know that I'll talk to about you know about cash is this concept of, you know, always on, right? Cash always works, right? Unless you are the unfortunate guy that will get fake notes and all of that, you know, cash always works, right? And all of us in this room here, we all know that, you know what, our channels are never down, right? Those point of sales that we use, they work 100% of the time, right? If I asked any of you here to raise your hands where you've never, ever had a problem with your channel in your life, right? You've never, ever had that problem. Right? Chances are that all of you are going to raise your hands and say, I've never had a problem. Right? But we all know that is not real, right? So it says that all of these solutions that we put in the market, they better work, and they must work all the time, you know, because if they don't work and somebody has got a trolley full of groceries, that's problematic if they can't pay for that. So if we don't meet or exceed this value proposition, you cannot blame people for saying that, sorry, I'll stick to what I have. And I've just given you 3, which is basic. There's a ton more of these things, but we don't have the whole day.
Brian, from the experience perspective, the role of cash in the township economy, from what you've seen, and relative to the adoption of digital payments, why do you think cash is still king or queen, depending? And why are we still seeing such a reluctance to adoption of digital payment solutions, especially in our township economy?
Okay, I think first, cash is queen. Yeah, well, I had someone say queen.
So yeah, cash is queen. But on the other hand, cash is also, carrying cash rather, is also inconvenience. So from a lived experience, for one, I'm going to relate to when I opened up my business that sells amakota and chips and some Asian cuisine around 2014. I realized obviously that, and I was coming out of an acceleration program as well, I realized that I'm potentially losing a lot of money because when you have cash, you buy with what you have. But when you carry a card, I'm able to upsell you. And you are also, I mean, you go into the aisles, whether it's Discam competing with Clicks or whatever, you realize that you may go into Discam because you want to buy toiletries. But as you go out the aisle, and this is obviously scientific, it's designed specifically to work on your taste buds or whatever, if I may call it for lack of a better word, where you end up buying chocolate, you end up buying chips, you end up buying all these other things. Now, obviously, when you get there, then you use cash. Now, whether it's a conversation of whether it's behaving correctly financially, that's something for a different conversation. But at the end of the day, because you have a card, it's easier with money that you don't see come out than when you hold out cash and say, I'm paying 100 Rand and I'm going to be left with 20 Rand or nothing. So now you find situations where, just before I get to whether there's lack of, you find situations where in my store, in those times, in its prime, somebody comes, sees, oh, you're also selling this. Oh, give me the club box. give me the fish and chips, give me what they suddenly buy for a whole family. But that person was just here to buy 1/4 for them. So they're thinking, it's about 5 o'clock, it's a Friday, let me just buy. Now suddenly, a 30 rand turns into a 300 rand for me into the business. But unfortunately, due to obviously the levels of illiteracy, and I don't really like this word, but obviously we have to use it within the business communities, EKAS, we tend to forget that all they need is perhaps some sort of guidance and education, because they're still making the money, they're still employing the people. Maybe they're not just running close to or running as formal as possible. I won't say formal because obviously they're not formal. And I wasn't formal as well, but I was as close, I was at a competitive level because of understanding certain things and understanding why I need to have a point of sale, why I need to, and even the guy who installed the point of sale told me that day that on average, maybe your turnover may increase by about 400 or something, and it did. And now, in township business, you can sell quarter, but the hardest things to move are like your soft drinks and what. But they're hard when someone has cash, but they're not as hard when somebody has. That comes the aspect of being able to upsell, being able to say, don't you want to, like I had a business that operated the same way you go into a KFC, where I've trained my staff to upsell. I've trained my staff coming obviously from a background of corporate sales and marketing. I've trained my staff to try and sell so that we can push the turnover for the company. And that's why at some point in just that one store, which I had 2 stores, a mini one, but in the major store, I could employ 9 people. It's not something that's so heard of in a quarter business. Normally a quarter business is owner and maybe an assistant sort of staff complement. It's highly ever something that actually employs. So coming back to obviously even what Busi was saying, I mean, when you're talking about 7 to 8 people, you do the maths, of course, like Stasha said, you are actually, providing sustenance for so many other families and all of that. So the challenges are there, but the problem, and another last problem that I want to mention. Now I had a friend of mine who has a tavern. Nice tavern, you can go there on a Thursday or whatever to just unwind. But here's the problem. For days on end, I kept on trying to encourage him to get a machine. I was specifically speaking of Yoko at the time, because for me, at the time, they were a game changer. Because remember, I'm coming from where I was using a traditional bank, was paying huge amount of rental fees. But obviously, perhaps because of the sort of turnover I was making, I was able to absorb those sort of costs. But for someone whose, turnover is very minimal, 400 rand on one terminal is a lot of money, just before you even pay. Remember, this is just rental at the time. Now you have to obviously then pay for transactional fees. It comes up to, so these were discouraging factors. These are still discouraging factors because of the education and the speed at which most of the entrepreneurs in the community, EKASI, they don't really know whether there's changes, whether other banks that are a bit aggressively competitive have come up with different products which are a bit cheaper and all of those things. So now trying to convince this guy, and I told him, you know what, at the end of the day, because if somebody's coming and I want a 6-pack or something, now I see on your shelf that I could buy that other bottle and I'll drink it over the weekend. I'm not going to buy it, but I'll be able to do the same at a formal liquor store. I'll be able to overspend. So now the township entrepreneur is losing out on the sort of potential they could make, because now they stifle and they're thinking, no, I just want cash. So it pretty much comes back to what I was saying, that if I have 200 and I'm spending 200 and it's finished, the merchant doesn't gain as much as they could gain from me as a customer.
Stash, I'd like to link the two in the context of what Busi's mentioned, the immediacy and the absoluteness of cash. But Brian has also talked about while it's immediate and absolute, it has limitations. And I want to then bring it into the context of solutions that are fit for purpose within the digital context, and specifically solutions that we currently have in the market. We still see the challenge of adoption. With all of what has been said, what do you see as some of those key elements that says digital is not being adopted and digital could actually be a viable option or alternative to cash that we are not leveraging at this point?
So I think there's a number of elements. One specifically is around transparency. Businesses need to understand what it's going to cost them to run it. Brian's alluded to that, but also the opportunity that he has for upselling, etc. But I also think that there's not a lot of consistency. All the terminals are pretty fancy, they all look different. Everyone's trying to add multiple services. Some are card terminals, but also value-added services terminals. Some are just value-added services terminals. There are tills that are integrating a whole bunch of services that you exclude payments. People are putting soft POS onto mobile, etc. And I think Brian also explained it, that there is not enough education and there's not enough support in the economy. So I've walked into some of those businesses where there's 20 or 30 devices in the back room. And they understand their business so well that they can explain that this blue terminal, I'll get this much on airtime, and on this orange terminal, I'll get this much on data, and on this red terminal, I'll get that. So they understand their business, and they play those players against each other. But that's all of us trying to capture exactly the same customer with exactly the same price model. But I'm not sure that there's very many people that make the effort to actually service those customers. Everyone cares about dumping the device there and saying, oh, I either got my rental income or my original purchase price and my ongoing sales, and they might say, this business was doing transactions, but now they've stopped. Why? It's actually because the next guy came with the next device and gave them a better deal from a pricing point of view. And so what I would love to see is something radical, like, there used to be, there is Mr. Delivery in our world, and then Uber got really creative and created Uber Eats. Can we create an Uber services team that goes out into those economies and services devices, trains the businesses on how to use them, shows them the upsell, gives them more products, says, oh, we can do stock management for you. Oh, we can help you, purchase online. Oh, we can help deliver your goods to you so you don't have to leave your business. Oh, we can help you. There's a lot of businesses doing decaching, etc. But I think that there's more than just, we've got the pricing, we've got the product, we've got the transaction processing, but I'm not actually sure that we're servicing that market.
And in the spirit of servicing that market, Busi, the question of trust. And it is a question, a comment, and statements of old. We don't trust because we don't understand. Your comments on that, and what role do you think trust plays in what we've seen, which is the phenomena of low adoption of digital payments, especially in our township economies?
Yeah, so we've spoken about education from the business side. Right? Now, adoption is a two-sided matter. Right? That the clients, so think of Brian's clients, right? They also need to understand what's going on with the systems that we are putting out in the market. Right? But some of the best designed systems, they actually don't need a user manual, right? They are designed to be simple, and that simplicity takes away that fear for somebody that if I use this thing for the first time, will it work, or do I have to go through 10 steps to be able to get this thing to work or not? Right? And we've experienced this in the payments world, quite a lot. A couple of years ago, we implemented this collections capability. I'm not going to mention the name to protect the innocent, right? And think of it, if you're a South African, you never had to worry about this thing called a mandate, right? You went and you signed a contract for your phone. You walked away, you had your contract. And for the first time, we say to you that, listen, you must approve the mandate, right, for this debit order to run from your account, right? And I remember the early days of it, a couple of months into this, the response rates from clients was below 30%, right? And you start engaging. I mean, I had the privilege of talking to the big businesses because these are their clients as well, right? And, they were like, what are you doing? But I'm being polite. I mean, the phrases they were using, right? They said, that, you know what, Busi, you are from Bank A, right? My call center team, I have to give them instructions for your bank, right? Bank B, they are doing this completely differently, right? So literally, a call center agent has got a little piece of paper that says, let's ask the client, which bank are you from, right? And we tell you which bank and follow the script, right? Follow that script, right? I mean, you can imagine the complexity that comes with that, right? And we've now launched this instant payments capability. And, depending on who you ask, right, the level of complexity varies, right? I mean, I'm multi-banked, and I've used some of the banking channels to do this. And I work in payments, but sometimes I have to think that, oh goodness, what must I do next, right? So where I'm heading with this, right, is that if we want to drive adoption and make sure that people trust that these things will do what they expect them to do, you better make sure that it's simple, right? And preferably, there has to be some level of standardization that is put forward, right? That, yes, we can, channels is where we differentiate, right? But there should be some level of standardization, right? And some guidelines, just to make sure that, people don't have anxiety if they want to consume a digital product, right? The reason cards are adopted a lot is because there's quite a lot of consistency. All of these point-of-sale devices, they work the same, right? If you are the auntie at the till or the gentleman working at the till, you don't ask those clients which bank do you bank with, and not tell them how to use this, right? So you build trust by making sure that people don't have to think twice when they use their products. And when things go wrong, which is the point that you were talking to about servicing, right? That if things go wrong, how do we respond to it? If somebody calls and says that I was defrauded, what do we do about it? Do we say, sorry, it's your fault, you gave away your credentials or whatever, et cetera, right? Fine, you won't have the liability, but the trust is broken, right? So I think that, as the industry, we still have quite a lot of ground to cover, right? If we design simple systems, if we make sure that people get what they expect from a system, and we provide the necessary support, then I think that will contribute in building that trust in what we provide.
Brian, I'm going to come back to you. And on that point of trust and education, you touched on it briefly, saying there was a program that you did. And not to get into the details, but from your perspective, what role would knowledge and awareness play in this trust gap that we seem to have, and in bridging that gap, possibly accelerate the adoption of digital payments? So in other words, how does knowledge and awareness help us with this trust conundrum and help us with enabling digital payments adoption?
I think you are very right to touch on that acceleration program, and the reason why I passionately mention it a lot is because I saw results from it. I saw a guy from Davidton who was washing amateki, just a container, turning his business into a formal business that was either adopted, I stand to be corrected, or is in partnership with a national sports brand, like a Total Sports or what. I saw a lady who took Khmer, ginger beer, non-alcoholic ginger beer, and formalized it and called it, I just forget the name. These are people that I went to the same program with. So I saw a whole lot of people go from understanding how to scale their business, whereas they didn't know at the time. I saw somebody who was making archer and those sort of things. So I'm almost tempted to believe that the conversation amongst all key stakeholders, and yesterday when I was listening at stakeholders being mentioned in terms of fintech, in terms of corporate, there's one that I felt was not mentioned, and perhaps we need to perhaps bring into the conversation and see and hold into account, because our country has a Ministry of Small Business. Now, whether, obviously, as a country, we're not really confident in government per se, but sometimes you find that there's this talk about corporate and government seeing how they can work. And they have worked in certain instances, and it has worked. So I'm almost tempted to believe that you need a conversation that involves those kind of stakeholders to say, okay, let's design something specifically for township economy. Because the money is there. It's there for everyone. It's a win-win for everyone. But how do we access it? How do the fintechs win? How do the banks still continue to win? I think earlier on, one of the speakers, Miranda, I'm just trying to remember her surname. She spoke of something very important, and she's well versed because obviously she's traveled a lot and understands it and the models that other countries have adopted and what. And obviously those are some of the things we need to do as well. Look into how these other countries, whether we're speaking of Singapore, Brazil, or whatever, how have they, also tying into what Katleho Mapai also said about how these ecosystems were talking to each other. Because currently they're not. So currently you have that township ecosystem that's operating in its own vacuum. They don't know how to obviously accessing, except for just getting the products. And once they get a product, they just have to run with it. But they're not getting the best value. I'm trying and I'm hoping to get to a point where back in the day, one of the biggest liquor stores, Ekasilam, was one of the first, if not the first, to go into digital payments. But they have not evolved enough to get the full benefit of digital payment. And now the risk of that is that when formal business comes into, because now we have obviously malls and what things we didn't have in the past. When formal business comes and finds township business that's not prepared to meet up with the challenges, to meet up with competition and what. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying township business, I'm not looking at it in a naive perspective where I'm saying we want them to commit with formal business. That's a different conversation, debatable as well. What I'm trying to say is that within their space, they need to be competitive as well. And these systems are enablers, but there's not sufficient education around them, there's not sufficient backup. So if this is going to be a win-win for all stakeholders involved, the approach needs to be different. The approach needs to be, in layman's term, where a business that has a one swipe machine operates on a small little window has to be given opportunity or given or appetite aroused to get to a point where there's a couple of more terminals where they're making more money, because they're not making enough money. So now it becomes, and I always say that then you're not really an entrepreneur, you're just getting by. You're able to take your kids to school, which is good and all of those things, but you're not able to really scale, you're not able to expand, you're not able to grow your business into what. So we need to look into how do we help township businesses to what. So perhaps a program that identifies youth and, well, I don't want to exclude older people, but I know that adoption is not easy the older you get, and I say it with all due respect. No, I say it with due respect. I mean, I say it with due respect. I mean, it's not easy to try and get my mom into ChatGPT. Let's just, you know what I mean? That's just the reality. Of course, you'll find the odd person who, you know, has allowed themselves to evolve into technology and understand and grasp it, but we will never grasp it like that. The younger ones that are coming will grasp it quicker, will grasp it further. Also, the brain composition is a bit different. And again, I'm not insulting anyone. I'm just talking about things that you can research, and you will see that even ChatGPT will say that. So maybe when you have something that has an intake and is a program, because if we're going to try and do it with individual businesses and what, we need a bit of a holistic approach. We need something that's accelerated, something that if we start now, we'll see the results in 10 years or whatever, predominantly youth, and obviously looking at, like I said, win-win situation, because then the fintechs and the banks and everyone are able, obviously, to track more money within the communities and help these businesses. So it's a, just, I don't want to, talking too much.
I see passion. That's where I'm gonna. Stasha, in the last minutes that we have, I'd like to just tie it in and say, are we doing enough to bring the merchant and the consumer into our solutioning conversations and in actually bringing solutions that are fit for purpose? A bit controversial, but let's go.
Well, the short story is no. I think it's better, and there are some strong voices in the industry that are changing that. But, you know, I was told a lovely story last week that I really thought was just amusing. And, you know, payments people are predominantly geeks, because payments are complicated. But we must be very careful around overcomplicating it because it's sexy, rather than actually answering the consumer and the merchant need. And the story was that they were working on a school program to support kids that had diabetes to prevent them from being able to buy the wrong things from the tuck shop. And they built this incredible app that did that. And they went into the school and watched it being used. And all the kids that had diabetes purchased the goods that they were allowed to, because that's what the app allowed them to do. But they had a little young student that was very entrepreneurial and had a complete side hustle that would swap out the sweets with the chips. So come on, guys. You know, the point is, are we going into the economy correctly and actually speaking to, are we creating advocates? I mean, Brian's a great advocate, that he can speak to partners and other merchants around him to say, this is the value to my business around having a device. This is how it grew my business. But are we making sure that Brian has the right support? Are we giving him the service? You know, we talk about, I've always talked about the dignity of cash and the control. When I have cash, I have control. Yes, there's a lot of other issues. I can't, there's the immediacy thing, but I can't upsell to the customer. But what cash gives me is I know what the rules are. So when you have a device, is there infrastructure? You know, is there power? Is there network connectivity? Is there support of a device failure? How quickly is a guy going to go there? Businesses revert to cash because the device failed, and the service guy might come there 4 weeks later. Now, in a multi-lane retailer, that will not happen because they have the clout to prevent it from happening. But we definitely have to get better at speaking to the people that use the system and understand whether it's going to work.
Wusi, in 30 seconds, food for thought as we move forward? Where are we leaving this? What are we leaving on the stage?
Look, my message is simple. The people in this room, you've already done quite a lot in providing services to allow small businesses to grow. But we are at an interesting moment in payments where we are almost rejigging everything the way we've known it. And it presents an opportunity for all of us here to be able to rethink even the way we do business, the way we design the solutions, where we bring clients into the process. And I believe all of us here, if we work on these things, will only be able to make our country a better place for everybody to thrive.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Busi. I'd like to close off by saying what I picked up is viable value propositions are important. Consistency, ease of use, standardization. Knowledge and awareness are pivotal to establishing trust. And we mustn't forget that trust is earned. And lastly, the landscape is changing. And while it is challenging, but it provides us with great opportunities as well. Thank you to my esteemed panel for the conversation, the passion, and for sharing the stage with me as we have, as I say, a very interesting conversation on this. And on that note, thank you to the audience for gracing us with your presence. We have been through the comments and the questions as we were going along, and some very great food for thought. I think you should take them up with some of our panelists offline, hint, hint. And to our MC, thank you for the time, and I hand it over back to you. Thanks, Tando.